We have great pleasure in welcoming Air Commodore Jasjit Singh to our department. He doesn't need any introduction to all of you, but I will say a few words about him, mainly on his contributions which he has made, especially with regard to strategic thinking in India. He is currently the Director General of Center for Air Power Studies in New Delhi. He is the formerly Director of Institute for Defense Strategy Analysis in New Delhi. And I think there are no words to describe in terms of his contribution which he has made, especially in India's strategic thinking. He is one of the very few strategic thinkers of India. He has contributed some of the original work in the strategic studies. He has coined the term recess deterrence, which many of us have been using in our writing, and he also has been able to contribute in terms of understanding India's neighborhood or India's foreign policy. A lot of things which he has done over the years has been of great significance for India as a country, and also his contribution in the evolution of India's nuclear doctrine is well known to all of us. A lot of things which he has done, each one of us keeps reading his work in terms of putting our analysis, a lot of things which we have been doing. So he has been a great source of inspiration for all of us. And I have been, I think I feel great privilege in terms of telling you that I have worked under him way back in the early part of 90s at IDSA and learned a lot of things from him. And the first lesson of strategic studies was given by him to me. So a lot of these things I don't want to really elaborate because of you know him very well. Sir, this is our I think all of the students are not here because I think some of them have gone for their Diwali celebration to their hometown, the first semester, but many of them are here. And also the first semester student, we have the PhD scholars with this particular group here. I request Professor Nalpar to present a bouquet to him as a part of our welcoming gesture. Now I request Air Commodore Jasjit Singh to say a few words about this very significant theme which we have been able to discuss this morning on the 50 years of India-China war. We have somewhere around half an hour for you, sir. Half an hour.
I'd like to stand up with it. I can put you back. Otherwise, people at the back doesn't get to see you. Thank you very much for asking me to come to Manipal. It's always a pleasure. And Manipal has provided us with some outstanding scholars which will announce the name of the Center for Air Power Studies. I hope that I go back one day and we'll have some more names joining us in whatever form, whatever subject it may be. There's a lot of writings on China and the war. It is now 50 years. In fact, by this time, 50 years ago, the second phase was just about starting and finished on the 20th, 21st of November, 1962. When you look at the map, you find that there's an Air Force station very close to where the Chinese came. I spent 1961 and 62 at that Air Force station as a flight commander of the fighter school. I was transferred out in July 62 to undergo an instructor's course. So I wasn't there when the war actually took place. But I didn't lose out anything because in any case we did not use the fighters. That itself is a very big question as to why India did not use the fighters. Although if we had used it, I would say that there were good chances that possibly we might have won, but certainly the Chinese would not have won. That has been debated and not debated for a long time. But what I was working on, and Professor Arvind actually got hold of that, is that something that has not seriously been looked at as to why did the war take place? What were the causes of the Sino-Indian War? I did write a short paper, 5,000 words, but then one thing and the other, I was touching it now about 17,000 words, and I think it goes another about 15,000 words. But there's so much to understand as to why the war took place. There are a number of reasons. Unfortunately, what is happening in our country for the last 50 years is that we generally pass an opinion rather than anything based on serious, objective research. The most popular idea is that India started a forward policy, and therefore that provoked the Chinese to start a war. As a subset of the same idea, you will find again and again in much of the literature that the Prime Minister, while going for the Commonwealth Conference at the airport, very casually said that I told the army to throw the Chinese. And that provoked the Chinese. There are a few more of these popular conventional wisdom exist in terms of our own understanding as to why the war took place. There are a large number of books on China. Unfortunately, barring the odd one, all of them are either justifying, mostly written by military officers, either justifying somebody's own actions and reactions, like General Paul's own book, or they're blaming somebody else. It doesn't really help, although it is very typically Indian, part of the Indian culture, so to say, to find an excuse for why we did that rather than trying to understand as to why it happened. So therefore, I'm going to take a little time. Professor Arvind has already put the deadline to 30 minutes. But I hope there'll be more questions. Because for me, questions, especially from younger people, have been the source of my own understanding and study of bulk of the things that I know about. Things I learned independently was flying, and then I haven't flown for the last 35 years. Bulk of the time, number one, and I go on 4 or 5 issues. Number one, that the boundary issues has been the cause of the war as to why did we not settle the boundary when we made the 1954 agreement with China on Tibet. We should have done that and settled the boundary, because after all, the boundary was actually the boundary between Tibet and India. This idea that in 1954 we could have done that, theoretically it's possible, but in practice, what had happened was that the Dalai Lama had signed an agreement with the government of China in May 1951. The 17-point agreement run into 3 pages, put that as an appendix to my paper, which actually they had come to an understanding that China will respect the religion, etc., and the culture, and Tibet will give up de facto its sovereignty to China. So once the Tibetans had already decided, there was very little scope for India. The best that India could do was in 1954 just to simply pull back and get out and disengage from this place. That still does not solve the issue of the boundary. understand the relative claims, China and India, one has to do a lot more studies. One of the things is that at a certain stage, by about March 1960, when a few incidents had taken place, I think only 2 incidents in 1959, and then the border was quiet in 1960, the border was quiet in 61. So the two prime ministers met, John and I had come to India. He stayed for 2 weeks. Obviously he had a lot of time at his disposal. But all the discussion that took place could not produce any solution because the Chinese took a totally different point of view. What the two prime ministers did agree upon was that this is a very complex situation, so therefore the best thing is that we would ask the officials on both sides to sit down and collect all the possible evidence that you can. The Chinese will collect the Chinese evidence, the Indians will collect the Indian evidence, and that will be exchanged and discussed. And a final report will be used to say what are the main issues. And therefore, once this evidence was available to the two prime ministers, to the two governments, then we will find a solution to the boundary. Starting from somewhere around June 1960 till February 1961, there were 4 meetings that were held. I don't want to go into that detail, but the end result has been that India published the report within a month of the end of the meetings. The document runs into 641 pages without the maps. The maps will take another about 75 pages, so that's not in the book. In my life, I've gone around, certainly in the last 30 years, and asked a lot of people to say, have you read the official report? And people look very surprised. Which official report? Because this is not a book that is put in the market. It's a book that came out officially from the publication division. The Chinese had it, we had it. I first read that in 1983. And since then, I have read that, I think about 4 or 5 times. There's no point in going over 640 pages of evidence in this moment. Trust me when I say this, that there's enormous evidence that India produced, and it's surprising that India, which had, by not ruling itself, had managed to put through that evidence at a scale which is actually, the evidence itself is based on, for example, the religious basis for the claims, the administrative basis for the claim, the natural features of the claims, etc., etc. And at each and every head, there was an enormous amount of information. The bottom line of this is that the Chinese had very little evidence on which to base their claims. In fact, it is almost hilarious. I mean, if it wasn't so serious that there was any war and still a tension between China and India, that the Chinese produced 2 Chinese maps, which when we looked at it, when the officials looked at it and found that actually those 2 maps prove India's evidence, India's point, not the Chinese point. The Chinese had no idea of what we were doing, or we can interpret the other way around if you like. They said that they were not really interested, that they were only doing pro forma thing. By and large, they kept saying that there is no known demarcation between China and India's border ever. which is actually true. But if you want to then examine just even that particular statement, then you know that what border basically was the Tibet-India border, not China-India border. My point in saying this is that, and there are commentaries on this that appeared in the early years, unfortunately not in India, but in the United States, where scholarship is, in my view, fairly high, which came to the conclusion that India's evidence that India produced may not be 100% right, but it almost is correct. But the Chinese had no basis for its claim at all. That meeting, which was promised by the two prime ministers, that once this evidence is available, then they'll sit down then to find a solution to the problem, that never took place. It's still not taken place. In fact, the moment you talk to the Chinese about the official report, they clam up and they don't want to discuss it. I found that personally, even at the non-official levels. One reason as to why the Chinese from then onwards pushed off towards increasing confrontation, which had many other factors too. Perhaps that certainly now, having claimed this in a major way worldwide, a printed volume, by printing the report, India created a problem and Chinese now lost face. That's my interpretation, I could be wrong. And therefore they don't want to talk about it, because the moment you talk of the official report and the evidence as it exists, you find that there is just no case at all. And for a country that considers itself a middle kingdom, a great power, increasing now, even greater power now, is not going to accept that they actually are making a false claim. So that, if anybody wants to do that, that itself, just that itself, in my judgment, form sufficient information, sufficient data to even do a PhD. It hasn't been done in this country. Say, right, what was the evidence? Because what was produced by the Indian side at the time was some treaty of, the earliest one produced was 781. That will give you an idea of the type of evidence that Indians collected within those matter of 6 months. So that was a very major factor, that boundary remains so formed. The problem also is that while it started off as an issue of boundary, today it's no longer a boundary question. You'll also find that in the official report, the focus was all on the Ladakh-Tibet border, the outside segment. Because at that time, 1959-1960, or at least up to 1958, while the Chinese kept claiming what is today Arunachal Pradesh, but that was not really a serious issue. It is to the Chinese diplomacy can claim some rights, but then finally, where they had no claim at all, they turned the whole thing around by saying this. Here it's important that during about approximately that time in 1956 and again in 1959, 1960, Chow and Lai did offer to India that the Chinese have a claim 94,000 square kilometers in what is Arunachal Pradesh, and they're occupying about 48,000 square kilometers in Aksai Chin. So Chow and Lai offered a swap, saying let's close this, you keep what you have, we keep what we have. A lot of people today blame Mr. Nehru for saying no to it. I think the people who say no, blame Nehru for this, forget that the Constitution of India lays down India's territories. And no Prime Minister has the right or the authority to simply give away land. And we are not talking about, really speaking, what is not a border issue, it is not a border dispute, it is a territorial dispute. Territorial disputes between two countries which are both sensitive about their sovereignty. Both had just become, India had just become independent, China was always independent, but the PRC had just taken over. And the PRC also believed, especially